Okay. Greetings and welcome to another Ligali Live. I didn't know that it was catching me while I was munching away and trying to have a drink. We're a little bit early. We normally go around 7:30. Okay. Got to be careful of that feedback. So let me see if I can mute that over there. Great. So hopefully you can actually hear me all okay. Today, it's the 24th of October, 2021. We're in our new space, as you've probably noticed. I'm here with the wonderful Oleander. I'm just going to be sharing some news about some of the issues that have been taking place, what's been going on over the last 2 weeks. I've got to get used to a different layout. We're still trying to put our configuration back. We should be here for the next couple of months, so hopefully the next broadcast we've got a little bit smoother. Please bear with us. Zoom is online, so if you want to join the Zoom meeting, the ID is 93390905028. It's all in small font in front of me, so I'm going to squint every now and then while I'm doing it. And of course, you're always free to interact with us via YouTube, and we'll try and keep an eye on that, or the chats inside Zoom. So let's just do a quick check. Oleander, can you hear me okay? Are you okay? Do you want to unmute and just say hi to everyone? And I'm not sure that she can hear us or she can unmute. Okay.
Sorry, yes, I can. I can hear you.
Oh, right. Okay. So now I think I turn the volume down, so I can't hear. Did you say something just then? Ah, brilliant. Okay, gotcha. So technical check, all okay. I think we're ready to go. I don't know how YouTube's going to do this. Going to put us 2 windows or focus on one screen. Actually, honey, what happens if you turn off your video? Does it just go to the main screen? Can you do that for 1 second for me? Let me see what happens. So, okay, so we'll find out. I have no idea whether, there's a lag between me seeing it on Zoom, which is instantaneous, and then what actually comes up on the YouTube. So I'm actually looking at the YouTube screen now, and I can still see the both of us, which means that you can't actually see the slides very clearly because they're tiny. Ah, that's better. Okay, so that's cool. So whenever Oleander wants to talk, she's going to hit the video button, and then she'll come on screen as well when she unmutes. And then otherwise it'll be this view with me talking. I've got to stop looking over there, really disconcerting. Me looking over here and squinting, trying to tell you what's going on. So let's get started. I think I said it. Ligali Live, welcome. Hope you're okay. Close to another African History Month ending, and there's quite a lot of news related to African History Month. So I'm going to start with some of the news that's been taking place over the last 14 days. And one of the stories that I think, so I'm just trying to get everything working. One of the stories I want to talk about is, after the tragic murder of the Tory MP, David Amess, people found out, I mean, the media found out that it was a British national who was an African, come from Somali. And the media, the right-wing media, I shouldn't say all the media, some parts of the media started exploiting this once again to start stirring up trouble on a racial and nationalist ground. So they initially started putting out stories pretending that he wasn't British and that, you know, he came over here as an immigrant and all those kind of stories and stuff like that. But we now know that's completely false. I'm not really going to go over that because it's, you know, as we said, it's quite tragic, it's quite recent. But what I do want to say is that what we're seeing is the Somali community being targeted with death threats right now. And this is part of the problem we have when this nationalist rhetoric is kind of like stirred up, that the acts of one person is then used to justify the abuse of an entire community. So, you know, you'll see that some of the stories out there, I mean, it's an interesting figure that when the census figures are later revealed this year, they're expected to come out pretty soon, that we'll find out there's now around 500,000 Africans of Somali heritage in the UK. And even though there's such a large number, they still don't have the political clout or influence that they should do. So it makes them very vulnerable to these kind of attacks, especially when some of the most powerful media institutions in the country start rubbishing them because of their heritage. So I just wanted to start with that because it's quite a tragic case, and it would be awful if it then was used as an excuse to start ramping up rabid Afrophobia. The next story I want to talk about, which is quite apt, it comes up every single year and tragically also during African History Month, is The Economist, which is a magazine really interested in financial matters, even though it intersects with politics. They did a piece on actually the costs of having African hair, in its natural state, and how that cost is actually damaging the opportunities, the business opportunities, the employment opportunities, and just kind of like impacting on the well-being and lifestyles of women of African heritage, just simply because they've got to continuously maintain it, find ways to excuse it, whether they decide that they're going to not keep it in its natural state to fit in, what that actually means. And I don't know if you can see on the back of the slides, there are two images over there. The second one is about discrimination against African hair is something that should stop. This is a campaign group that's been calling for this. I think those of you who've been watching or been involved with Ligali a long time, we know that we did the film Beauty Years, which led a campaign on the same particular issue. And it's just sad, really, that this issue about women's hair and us having our natural being policed and used as in a discriminatory manner against us is still a live issue, but it still is. And so, we're going to get stories like this kind of every year until the matter is resolved. So I just thought I'd share that because that's just come up again after the last couple of weeks. And it was quite, feeling a deja vu, hearing the same stories, the same narratives over and over again. And actually this program today is going to be a little bit like Groundhog Day. You're going to start to see repetitions of trends. We just started with, what seems to be a terrorist attack, and then the whole community being demonized against, kind of like what happened to the Irish with the IRA. Kind of like, this is a constant thing with Muslims and Islamophobia. But the next story, which is related to the one I just talked about, was that there was a report that's done that came from some research, which found that professional African women are still paid far less than their counterparts, their non-African counterparts, and their careers actually stagnate when contrasted with them, and I shouldn't say obviously men, but sadly men as well. And it's a really interesting piece. There's a headline there that more than half reported difficulty in being their authentic selves in their organizations, having the need to change their persona to fit in with the company culture as they struggle to mirror others. And this is because of their contrasting backgrounds. And so they've used the term a meritocracy is kind of like how they feel that is the only way they can actually achieve. They kind of like mirror and hide who they are, just so people can accept them. It's a really tragic state of affairs. Again, I keep using the word tragic today, don't I? I'm going to try and find something a bit more upbeat. But again, this is October 2021, and we're still seeing those barriers in the employment sector. I think, Leanne, you want to say something? I think you're muted.
Yes, I'm sorry, I've just unmuted. It is something that the African women, we go through all the time during our working lives, from people making comments about our hair to people wanting to touch our hair, and all sorts of stupidness really in the workplace. And the fact that someone can say to you that your hair isn't professional enough is just, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. What did you hire me for? Was it my hair? Was it the style I wear? Is it a jealousy thing? I remember someone going to the theatre, a sister going to the theatre, she had an afro, and the complaints started behind her. She could hear the tutting and the this and the that, to the end when I believe what they called an usher came up to her and asked her if she wouldn't mind changing seats because the people behind her were having problems actually seeing the show. And And she stood her ground and said, well, no, this is my hair. Why would I change my seat to a poorer seat just so that people can feel okay about sitting behind me? That's their business, really. So she didn't move. And I mean, when I saw her hair, it wasn't, a massive afro. It was an afro. It was an afro. But yeah, there is an issue for us as sisters when we think about our hair, how we style it, and all the rest of it. And it's something which sadly and unfortunately is still out there today. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, well, very much so. And whenever people use that as an excuse for discriminatory behaviour, there's often something much deeper that just happens to be the convenient excuse that they use. And we see this in schools as well, when we see children being discriminated or excluded from schools because of their I'm not sure what happened there. Hopefully I'm back. I was just talking about children being discriminated because of their hairstyles, and and I'm saying that often these are discriminatory issues. I'm going to move on to the next story. But thank you for sharing that, Orianda. And the next one really is about a report that was taken in the music industry. And I get a feeling of this. I think we spoke about this probably a couple of weeks ago or something, maybe a month ago, when it was I think, was it June or July? July, because July is African Music Month or something like that, if I'm remembering correctly. I'll check the Kwaku. But there was a report in the music industry. And one of the things that came up and kept on coming up is that all artists of African heritage had experienced, well, I say all artists, I'm thinking it was something like 73%? Yeah, over 73% had experienced some kind of racism, whether it's direct or indirect. And it increased to 80% when it's talking about micro aggressions. And this is, again, a common theme. You would rather that during October, at least October, there'd be a memorial on these, that, you kind of hold off from negative news, and people will be trying to do their best to kind of like reflect on the achievements, the accomplishments, and the genius and the creativity and the entrepreneurship of African people. But unfortunately, what we continuously see is, as these reports come back and they're trying to address the issues, so I'm going to go to a slide, the problems are still there. And there's a couple of stories that I've placed on that image there that you can see. You're listening to me, your host, Toyin Ekpetu, on Ligali Live. You can join us on Zoom. It's 933-9090-5028. It sounds like a phone number, doesn't it? I'll say it again. It's 923-9090-5028. I'm here 24th. Is it 24th? Let me check. Yeah, 24th of October, 2021, with wonderful Alianda. And we're just going through the news from the last couple of weeks as it affects the Pan-African community in the UK. So the next story I want to touch upon, and this is, I said that sometimes you think that during African History Month, you'd hope there'll be some good news. Well, actually, there was a lot of good news, and this is yeah, sorry about that. For some reason, the camera keeps wanting to turn off. This is a different camera from the one I'm normally using. I've got as many cameras as people have handbags and trainers. Yes, it's a thing, but this isn't my prime camera, so I don't know why it keeps choosing to turn off, but hey, so it goes. But I'm going to have to resolve that. It's going to be really awkward. Anyway, so what I was saying, African History Month, there has been a lot of stories. People having some really good. Oh, I just realised that you can't actually see the slides anymore. That's really bizarre. Let me see if I can get it. But there you go. Wow. Okay. So there has been some really good stories, and like I said, I'm squinting because I'm short-sighted. There's been a plaque for one of what they call it, Oxford's first Black graduate. There's also been an award for the first Black driver to win the NASCAR Cup since, I think it was 1963. And there's also something in Wales about the most influential Black history, Andrew Watson, lost to history. And these are all really positive stories about some great. Yeah, that's really irritating. Okay, I'm gonna have to think about that. If it keeps happening, I'm gonna have to do a rapid switch to a different machine. So these are all positive stories about accomplishments that have been done by African people across the time. And they are really good stories, not written for this month. The only thing I did want to say is that there is a feeling of what we call the first black this, the first black that. It's an old trope, which is one that we kind of have got too used to. So it doesn't really celebrate us as doing something innovative or our creativity. What it kind of recognizes is the first time we were allowed to achieve in a different domain, because clearly, if you're saying we're the first black, it tends to mean that someone else has done it beforehand and we're just catching up. And so it's kind of like a backhand kind of compliment. You're saying that yes, we have done it as well, but you're also saying that we are inferior, that we're continuing to catch up. This is not to diminish the accomplishments of those people whose works are recognized, but it's just to recognize that the first black narrative can be quite toxic when it continuously dominates these kind of like narratives. The only part that kind of like goes against that is that when it's excavating hidden truths, then we're finding out actually, no, we're correcting some of the distortions and that this is what happened beforehand. So I just want to say that we had to be mindful of that particular narrative. I'm going to keep going on because I don't know if the camera's going to mess up. And so just another kind of a plaque that happened is another one for the first black player, Alf Charles, has been commemorated. And again, it's that same narrative, nothing wrong to be said about actually acknowledging these sportsters and these poets and these all these people who are from our community, who back in history has set a path. And seeing this is Black History Month, or African History Month as I prefer to it, it's right and the right thing to do to anchor them in the history, which paints British history and world history to be more correct in an accurate framework. But we have to be careful of that first black narrative. Okay, hopefully you can still hear me. I'm going to ask my wife, Leonard, to do me a favor. The next time that happens, if you can take the reins and actually just kind of like comment on some of the issues, and I'm going to find my other camera and replace this. And that's always a nightmare, right? When you have things working, the last thing you should do, actually, I know that's the last thing you should do. The last thing you should do is actually change the system, because then everything stops working. But this is just driving me a little bit insane. I just realized the camera's upstairs anyway. So this is a story that came out a couple of days ago. This one's a really horrible one. This is about a diner who went to a restaurant called Prezzo with his girlfriend. And he asked us if he could have a table, and they said, well, no, we don't have any spaces available. So he's looking around and saying, well, hold on, I can see a table over there. And I said, no, we don't have any tables, everything's booked. So he goes outside with his girlfriend. He's thinking, this is really odd, isn't it? So he goes out with his girlfriend, and then all of a sudden he pulls out his phone and he books a table online because there's spaces available, right? And he's like, cool, okay, you know what I mean? Goes back, goes into the restaurant and says to them, right, can I have a table, please? I've got a reservation. And they're like, you got a reservation? Because yeah, look, here's the booking. So they concede to his a reservation. They give him the table, and then throughout the whole evening, there's comments, there's jibes, and the atmosphere is better. Now he says that he can't be sure that it's actually racist that's doing this, but the quality of the service was awful. And what he did notice was that when other patrons came into the space, other customers, and those who were not African as well, they were treated with far more courtesy, with far more respect. There was no hesitation about giving them seats and tables. Now, he doesn't know if they pre-booked. And the restaurant, to its credit, has made an apology of sorts. They're saying it's not racism, but they recognise that the behaviour was outrageous. But again, this was one of those stories that comes and go. We don't hear much about it, but we talk about microaggressions, and we talk about this enduring kind of like insidious nature of forms of discrimination, and this is potentially one of them. I find it really interesting that there was apparently no booking space, and yet he was able to book on the phone. So you're starting to get this idea straight away that his custom wasn't welcome. Him and his partner's custom wasn't welcome there, but they took it in the end. And that actually is the case with discrimination. If he was being discriminated on because of the basis of the color of his skin. I don't normally use that phrase, but because he was an African, or for Afrophobia. Anyway, that's that story. Moving on. This is actually another story that's come back into the headlines, and that's because, well, I'll explain why before. Basically, there's a group of scientists who are actually saying that the UK research
Sorry about that, people. We are having some technical issues, as you know. I'm not sure how long it will take for Toyin to get back to changing the camera, but we are doing our very, very best. I've just got to try and see myself. Not sure on the news item myself, actually, but let's see, 1 second. Is it gone? Yeah, I mean, I actually, I wanted to go back a little bit to the story, the previous one about the diner and going to sit down and have dinner and so on. For me, it's the same issue that we have if we go into a shop. People make assumptions, don't they, about us if we go into a shop, even if you may have been in there before. Sometimes you'll get people that start following you around the shop, or may even make comments like, this item is quite expensive. And it takes me back to when even Oprah experienced something. I don't know if any of you have experienced it. But not sure what's happening right now. Seems to have gone a bit funny.
Okay, so that's a quick shift. I can hear you clearly, so hopefully.
Because it looked like I was paused.
Oh, hopefully it's still going. It still says we're still live, so I think we're still going out live.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to. Yeah, it's 100% better camera, and I'll try and cover that story. But you're right, Oprah. She went through a similar situation, and it was kind of a good example of why, no matter how well you think you've done inside a racialized society, what happens is that because we are physically different, in the sense that our skin is not something that we can hide, we can't pretend that we're something that we're not. It doesn't matter what class we think we are still vulnerable to racialization and the racist attitudes that come with that. So this particular story, and thank you, Oleander, for holding the fort with that. So this particular story was about the same practice taking place in the research sector. And I think I spoke about this some time ago. I think it's Addie Adelaide. She had done some investigation into how many principal investigators. So when you do a research project, you normally have a principal investigator. That's the lead person who drafts up and does the application project. And then you have other secondary or co-investigators who help out. And the principal investigator, the lead investigator, is the one who really is in charge, essentially. They do most of the work. And she found out that, when they were looking at the issue of COVID and trying to find out why people of African and Asian heritage were predisposed to death more so than anyone else. And this is really critically research, she found that even though there were bids made, and she made a bid and others have made a bid from African experts, we're not talking about people who are just kind of like taking a punt and taking a gamble. We're talking about people who are scholars, who this is their job, they're medical staff, clinicians, psychologists who making these applications. And of the millions, literally the millions of pounds that went out to research projects, I think 8 were funded in the end, like some big time projects. None of them went to African people. I think some went to a couple of Asian people, but nothing went to African people. And this is a common trend. And the reason why, if you can see the slide, I hope it's clear out there, you can see there's a story that says stillbirth rate is still high for African and Asian babies in the UK. The reason why I put that there is just to remind us that this has some real implications, real life implications. It's not just griping about not getting funding and and it's not calling the race card. Is that what they say? The race card? Yeah, it's not just about that. It's actually sometimes when you're doing this research, you need to talk and investigate with communities, and you need a certain level of cultural competence, cultural capital, cultural understanding to really get all the data that's required to do a thorough analysis of the problem. Because sometimes the thought might be solely clinical, it might be social, it could be psychological, it could be political, we don't know. So you kind of need to have that cultural capital, you need to have that social political competency. And if everyone who's doing research is European, if everyone doing the research is Asian, and there's no problem with other people doing research on other groups. I'm not arguing that for one moment. I mean, how could I? I mean, I'm a scholar activist. My research deals with African people, European people, Asia. I mean, it's all over the world. But what happens is that when you have research that's focused in a particular area, it's like I focus on Pan-Africanism, I focus on Afrophobia, then there's a huge advantage in me being an African and having an intimate understanding, not just a surface level understanding, but an intimate, in-depth understanding of who to talk to, where to go to, what to look for. And then that's how we start to solve the problem. So that's why, this story, even though it's an old story, it's actually a new story because it just came up, I think, was it the 11th of October? So it's just a couple of weeks ago, but it came up a couple of months ago before then. So even though it's regurgitated again and it's been updated with more work pushing for change, I thought it was important to focus on it in this news update. So let me go to another story. And okay, African History Month. Why is it important? I'm not going to go into why it's important. I mean, I think I've touched upon that earlier, and everyone seems to have an understanding that I almost said Black History Month. What is going on with me? Sorry, that was bizarre. I've never done that before. This is one of the challenges when you slip between language, when you're trying to explain, you don't have the quotes. I know people think, what's the problem with you saying Black History Month? But I don't actually use racialized language. This is part of the problem. We actually now know, and the report has come back out again, another report. I tend to get report fatigue, to be honest with you, but this one is talking about the school to prison pipeline, and this is the issue where we're finding that children primarily of African heritage, and in this particular case, not just if you're African heritage, but also if you're dual African heritage. So if you're an African and you've maybe got Asian, European heritage as well, then you are very vulnerable to increased exclusions, and not just exclusion from school. It doesn't just stop there. You start to divert into the criminal justice system. And so this is why they call it the school to prison pipeline, because the way that the social services are set up, the way that the CJS, the criminal justice system, is set up, is that it puts you on the radar for the wrong things, rather than trying to find interventionist approaches, like finding maybe you're on free school meals, and maybe you could do with some mentoring, or you could do with some extra tuition, or other activities, other resources that can actually take you away from those risks. Those things are not discussed. Those things don't happen. And so what happens is that this story, again, school to prison pipeline one, and the group NME, No More Exclusions, do some amazing work on this. They're a nationwide organization that campaigns around this and actually puts policy and champions on this issue, a particular issue, until that we have that seismic change that pushes forward on this, then we're going to keep hearing this story coming back again and again and again. And I remember it was the wonderful Akala was once talking about that if we look at the statistics, and I can't remember the numbers, but we look at the statistics of those who have been from our community who are actually incarcerated, then you tend to find there was a very high percentage of them, and it was I remember it was a ridiculous percentage, really high, that has actually been excluded. So it's not saying that that being excluded puts them in prison, but there is a clear correlation that actually if they get into that pipeline, if they go down that route, then what happens is that they're almost, well, I don't want to say destiny because that's not true, but the odds are stacked in their favor that they can't get out of it. And I put that on the same slide of this one of this young 9-year-old from Ipswich, because I wanted to make the point that this young girl, I don't know if you know the story, she was at school, primary school, with her classmates. She wanted to pretend one of the Harry Potter characters, Hermione, I think her name was. And she was told, not by the teachers, I think it was from her peers, she was told, you can't do that because you're black. You can't play Hermione. And she was in tears. It was really upset. It was one of her favorite characters at the time, and she lost the stories, etc. And so what she did in the end, and that's why this story came onto my radar, is that she set up a book club. And and the teachers are supporting her, the school is supporting her, and they're starting to reach other children, those who are not of African heritage. That was really important that they joined in the process, just to see a richness in diversity in the characters that are lead characters in some of these stories. And I thought that was amazing that this young girl would have that initiative and that she would give up her lunchtime and her energy to put in this project forward and helping to change the culture inside the playground of her school, not the teaching, not inside the classroom, but the playground. That was amazing. But there's another side to this stuff that was why I wanted to share this. There was something in me that felt it was awful that a 9-year-old should have to go through that in 2021. That a 9-year-old can't just play and have fun in school without having to deal with the politicized racism that comes. And I'm not saying the children themselves were trying to hurt her feelings or whatever. It could just, I wasn't there, so I don't know. I've only can see what I've read, and I've read a couple of reports on the same story. It's the same thing. I can hear what's there. So it's just that they said, no, she can't be it because of the color of her skin. But there's something to be said that why should she have to carry that burden of extra work at the age of 9-year-old? She's not even double figures yet. She's not even 10. There's something wrong in a society that puts that burden of work on the children. So while we can applaud her setting up a book club, we should also bear the shame of actually creating a society that facilitates the need for children to do that kind of work. And then the second image is a really important one, and this is a recurring story. It started last year, actually, when the Equalities Minister, Kemi Badenoch, made this outrageous statement that CRT is some toxic ideology, and that anyone talking about white privilege in the school were breaking the law, the equalities law. And what's happened is that the government is continuing to lean into it. This is from last year. They said the same thing this year. They're making it part of the law so that any school that teaches about white privilege as an uncontested fact, that's their caveat to get out of it, because they know once they say it's illegal, teachers who are risk adverse won't even go near the words white privilege. They'll be petrified. So the reality is that they're creating a climate in schools, in educational institutions, that we cannot discuss white privilege. And if we even assert that it's real, which I do, and I will continue to do so, even if we assert that it's real, then, and I think I spoke about this before, we have a minister who's saying that teachers and lecturers of that ilk, like me, should be fired immediately. This is ridiculous. This is outrageous. And this is that slippery slope to some kind of totalitarianism. I mean, I'll expand upon my ideas on that. But this is what's happening in the education sector. So we're seeing children being excluded, and the direct correlation between exclusion at school, going to prison. We're seeing primary school children being discriminated against in the playground, leading to them starting to get themselves involved in, I won't say an activist project, but clearly into a community education program. They're actually kind of moving forward on that. And then we're seeing a government which is regurgitating the toxic narrative of last year, which came about as a knee-jerk response to Black Lives Matter, because this is when the government was opposed to Black Lives Matter. They always have been opposed to it, but right then, when it first came out, they were like, Black Lives Matter, all those people protest, it's awful. And so this is when all that rhetoric came up. They softened the tone as they saw the global response, but now, a year on, they're still repeating the same mantra and threatening teachers and schools that if they teach anything about white privilege, there's something wrong and it's illegal. And their argument is trying to pit minority communities against impoverished European children, and trying to pretend that by putting resources into helping minority communities who face real discrimination, that somehow we are pulling resources away from the working class European children who are suffering under the same capitalist system that we all are. That's absolutely nonsense. And the people who are making this charge, the ministers, are actually responsible for hurting those European children as much as they are for hurting us. That's my rant done for the day. Let me move on. Actually, that's not my rant done for the day. I've just seen an ugly face of Dominic Raab. But the most scariest piece of news that's come out in the news over the last, I think it was 2 weeks ago, just after 2 weeks ago, so I think it must have been after our last update, was the Justice Minister. And this is the Justice Minister, we can be really clear, it's Dominic Raab, who's made this statement, which really should put shivers in the spines of everyone. I mean, anyone who understands the concepts of freedom and human rights should be worried about this. He made this statement at the Conservative Party to the lecture that under the premiership of Boris Alexander de Pfeffel-Johnson, that government and him would actually start passing legislation to ensure that if a judge passed a human rights legislation, so something from the European Court of Human Rights, which went against what they believed was correct, then they would modify it and correct it. And they used the word correct. And, this is a really, actually a remarkable statement to make. Because you've got to understand, when you have a court case, and if you have a jury, then the jury deliberates over the facts, they look over all the evidence, and they come to a decision. They can be perverse judgments, but generally, it's done through consensus. And then after that process, you have a judge who looks at it from a legal perspective, and they give their expertise. And to become a judge, it's just like becoming a doctor. It's a whole process of learning legalistic and all this kind of stuff. And then a judgment is made. I'm not saying that there are not errors in judgment that are made, but I'm just saying it's a lengthy process and it's got checks and balances. What Dominic Raab, the UK's Justice Minister, is saying is that if a judge makes a ruling which they've considered and they think is right, and he decides that actually I don't like that decision, then I will correct it as Justice Minister. That, if you have any understanding of how fickle and how selfish and egotistical that politicians are, is totalitarianism. That's that slippery slope. And this is one of the challenges with UK coming out of the European Union and the whole Brexit thing, this claim about sovereignty. It now means that our final arbitrator in law, at least, not in the moral universe, but in law, comes from Parliament. And if we look at the state of Parliament right now, we have an opposition party which is prostrate. The Labour Party is ineffective. The leader is an establishment figure. His name is Sir Keir Starmer. He is one of them. And now we have in these kind of laws. Remember the Kill the Bill protests, great campaign. It didn't stop the law being passed. So this is what I wanted to share there. The image of the guy over there, I don't know much about him apart from what I've been reading recently. Because when I prepare for this, I don't know, I've taken 6 hours and I just go through all the news over the last couple of weeks and then kind of learn up on it and do a bit of research and bump it into my head. And I was trying to find things that he said before this, because he's now become a darling of the right. And I'm always suspicious when we have brothers or sisters becoming darlings of people who are naturally hostile to African people and engage in Afrophobia. And his argument is really that Europeans mustn't respond. They've got to stop responding to what they call the woke agenda. It's like he's using the same tools that the Calvin Richardson and these kind of clowns are using against us. Now, I was very disappointed. I read some of the things he said, and there is an element of sense in some of what he said. I'll be very clear about that. So he makes this point that we have to be more focused on the tangible outcomes rather than tinkering with the words. And this is how I feel about decolonizing, right? So this is my position. As much as I believe in a decolonizing movement, and I engage in decolonizing practices, and I'm going to be doing a course next year on term on decolonizing anthropology, the kind of that system. We must also be careful that we don't just tinker with reading lists and names, but we also put in policies that change the material facts of people's lives. But I'm suspicious of anyone who's an equally willing to poo-poo over activists and scholars who are actually challenging the little things, because you see, it's like what's that saying, Ollie? Every mickle make a muckle. I can't remember what it was. I think count the pennies and the pounds will come up. It's the same principle. It's like we have to do with all of it. We can't prioritize one over the other, and I agree with that, even though we should prioritize things that have material change. But we also have to do with a symbolic change, and that's always been my approach as an activist. We do systemic change and symbolic change. So people get upset me when I do work that's on symbolic change. Well, who cares about the name change? Who cares? Blah, 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 blah. But then when I do systemic change, you're like, yeah, that's really cool. But every time I go over there, I still feel like it is. And when I talk about feelings, those change through cultural and symbolic change. So we must do both. So that the fact this guy is attacking one, it worries me. But like I said, I don't know enough about him to kind of like pass judgment, and I don't really like wasting time. That's why I haven't even mentioned his name. Also, because I can't really come short-sighted.
Yeah, every change is important, because remember that thing they call the butterfly effect. Also, it is really important that people, that people actually know about it. I think that's as important as it happening itself, because once people know about it, they can make their own little changes, and actually they're learning, just as we all are. We're all learning all the time. We all learn from each other, and I think it's really important that the little changes are celebrated just as much as the big ones. Yeah,
you're right, and that's why the things that take place in African History Month, where we're getting all those plaques and all those recognitions, all those things help to build a culture where African excellence is recognised. Okay, it's commemorated, it's respected and honoured, and that encourages a next generation to further the ambitions and to further the achievements and accomplishments. And so we keep moving forward. So even though this first black stinks of tokenism to a degree, there is a positive side that we're actually chronicling our achievements which have been erased. And when our history is being erased, that's when it's important to push back symbolically as well as it is on the material level. But thank you for that. It's nice to see that the camera hasn't turned off, so hopefully you can see me clearly and hear me clearly. I mean, of course you can hear me because Oriana can hear me. Great. So hopefully you can see and hear me. I just realized I haven't been checking the YouTube to see if you're online. Okay, and we have some. Okay, good evening. Cool, great, you're there. That's nice. Nice to know that you're online and Oriana's there. Remember, you can catch us on YouTube. You can type something in the chat. It's always useful to hear or read from something when we're doing this stuff. And of course, you can catch up with us on Zoom. I'm thinking about taking out the Zoom link at some stage. It complicates the process of getting everything done, but at the same time, I love the idea that anyone can drop in. But I think maybe I traumatize all of you, so you're kind of like happy to watch but not really engage. I don't buy it, honestly, and Oriana keeps me under reins if I rough you up too much. But we'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks, because we are in a no space, so that's got its own advantages and its own challenges as we're trying to figure out how to build a studio in a temporary home. Let me go to the next slide. Okay, so more work needs to be done to achieve racial equality in mental health nursing. And this was just an event that took place during African History Month. It had, is it David Harwood, the actor, took place in this and stuff. And it's actually, I mean, I didn't go to it, but I heard about it, and it builds on the work of people like Black Minds Matter and Tony Seeley in Brixton with the Acts of Resistance, and kind of like talking about the issues of mental health. And I think, you know, this is a really important project, and I think it's really useful and it's really helpful when you have people in the public eye, so media personalities and, you know, actors and singers and you know, musicians and dancers and sportsters and footballers, when they come out and actually acknowledge that they've had challenges and this is how they've coped, this is how they've resolved it, or they haven't resolved it, or what they're working for, they have people in their family, because it's still a taboo in our community to talk about mental health issues. And because we keep it a taboo, it means that the times when institutions get it wrong and they over medicate people because they're African, because they're fearful, they think our physicality makes us more dangerous than anyone else, and so they err on the side of caution, and then that over medication kind of like starts to cause harm. It gets you know, swept under the carpet, because we don't really want to talk about it. We don't want to admit that we have a family member who's suffering from psychosis or from hallucinations or whatever it is. And so I like these projects coming up, and I like the fact that Nursing Times has actually taken the time to kind of like talk about it, and we need more of them. So I'm just sharing that. It was new news, and I suppose it's not news in that sense, but it's something that affects our community. And you know, and as far as I'm concerned, anything that affects the Pan-African community is something we can talk about. Was that okay? I thought there was one more story, but okay, there we go. I don't know how long that's been. I'm a bit shocked. I thought there was something else. My mind's gone, but okay, that's great. We're here. So I will waffle on for maybe 2 minutes unless someone asks a question or says, I feel like I'm at uni giving a lecture now. I've run out of time. Okay, we normally go into our seminar groups. Okay, so what we're going to talk about, I'm speaking to groups. Yeah, that's what's happening. You know, we'll be here in a couple of weeks' time again. Still working out the technology. Still got to. Zoom is actually very convenient in a sense of actually it's very easy just to get online really quickly and do the YouTube thing. But there are some downsides of it. As you can probably see, it's got the UCL brand on it. I can't. That's a problem. I don't actually want that. It should be a Ligali brand, but that's another issue for another day. But you can see the equipment is. I'm starting to watch it back together so you can see this here, but you know, we'll work that out. I am waffling because I really I'm so sure I had a couple of news stories as well, and I just completely gone a blank. I can't remember what they were. On the end, I don't know if you've got anything else to say, or if we're going to sign off and see everyone in 2 weeks' time.
Well, not really related maybe, but not sure. Just wondering about the cases that have gone up in terms of the COVID. Have they affected us disproportionately again this time? That's one thing I would like to find out about.
No,
I'm
okay,
not sure.
It's true. I haven't spoken about that issue for a while actually. Okay, well, yes, it has. I mean, the cases that have gone up, it's always, I think I said this quite clearly, never really focus on the numbers of cases that are reported cases of infections, because they're always an estimate. There are many people who get infected, they don't know they're infected. When they get infected, they don't report that they're infected. So they give an indicator of what's happening. So you get a picture, so you know that we are in herd immunity mode. So you know that, you know, it's ravishing through the nation, but you can't actually get a good scale. So the two numbers that you really want to know are hospitalization, how many people are in hospital across the UK, and how many people are dying each day from this. Because those are the numbers that really can't be faked. That would require a conspiracy of a level that is, it's just not, those are the solid figures. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. So what's happening is that even though the infection figures are going really, really high, the hospitalization numbers are increasing, but they're still around 900 to 1,000 across the UK. And the NHS can cope with that. It does cause problems. It doesn't mean putting off some surgeries, but there was already a backlog, which is why they're having a problem. But it's not at the levels. It's not like the 9,000. You know, it's not where it was before. And so, because there's 1,000 people in hospital across the UK, what we're seeing is that out of that, I mean, you'd have thought the number would be lower because it's only less than 1% of people who die from COVID. But unfortunately, what we're seeing is roughly 140 deaths a day. Now, I I mean, all, of course, this is just all, everything is awful. I mean, I've always had a yardstick that the moment we start to see 400 going up to 600 deaths a day, then I will lock down, irrespective of what the government says, because then you know it's too close. You know the figures are stack up in the wrong direction, and it means you're going to start seeing neighbours, family members just dropping dead from it. So it's not panic station, but it's recognizing that we're also going into winter, we're going into flu season. And so those infection numbers are going to increase, and the spreading is going to increase because it gets cold outside. And when we're cold outside, we stay indoors. And when we stay indoors and we close the windows with no ventilation, you just need one person to be infected, and it's far easier for them to spread it to everyone, let alone, I mean, we can talk about schools and universities and all that sort of stuff spreading it, but it's the coldness, the cold weather, and that's the perfect environment for the virus to spread. Now, how is it impacting us African people? The biggest challenge that we have is the same one. I'm going to sound like a scratch record, and I know I'm going to upset a lot of people here, is that a lot of us are unvaccinated. And you know my position on that. That's a choice. If you choose not to be unvaccinated, that's cool. That's your issue. As long as you're not clinically vulnerable, or someone who's in your care isn't clinically vulnerable, I think you do what you can do. And I don't know. I probably wouldn't have been vaccinated if our son didn't have a clinical condition. I'm just keeping it. No, I probably would have got vaccinated by now, but I wouldn't have been vaccinated earlier because I'm very suspicious of these kind of things. But I didn't. In many ways, that's why we did extensive research to make sure. But that's another thing here. What I'm saying is that a lot of our community still remains unvaccinated. So what's happening in this wave, where it's literally like a zombie wave, like this herd of infections spreading through the country. And this is why it's called herd immunity. It's just going ripping through the country. Whereas normally you can hide because it's in spotches. It's a bit over there, a bit over there. It's this massive wave of people infected, and we are just getting caught up in it. And then some of us are getting COVID, and we're getting the mild symptoms. So we're feeling a bit woozy, a bit tired, a bit fatigued, you know what I mean? And then it passes in a couple of days, and we're like, oh, we've got COVID, or maybe I've got COVID, maybe I've got COVID, and it's gone. But of course, that's not everyone. Those of us with respiratory issues or underlying health conditions, when we're getting here, we're dying. It's really as simple as that. And so in that way, because the wave is so big, we are, I would say, disproportionately more likely to die from it. The numbers are still, I don't want to say small, because 140 people a day to 200 people a day is not a small number. I mean, earlier this week, it was, I think 210, 220 people died in one day. So these are not small numbers. That's like, what's 200? That's like a double-decker bus, I mean, what's a bus, like 60, 70 people, 76 people, something like that? There's two bus loads of people. I mean, it's still a sizable amount of people dying unnecessarily each day. Some people are going to die from COVID, and no matter what medical intervention you do, whether they had the vaccines or not, their system, their respiratory system, whatever it is, that it is not going to protect them. And there's nothing we can do about that other than give our love, prayer, make them comfortable, stuff like that. But a lot of deaths are uncomfortable. What's happening in America is also interesting to look at, because what's happening in America, that wave is going through there, but they actually are starting to vaccinate. So a lot of people are doing it quietly, and the figures of uptake is changing, because they were seeing, it's one of the strange things, what's that saying, when America sneezes, we catch the cold. So what was happening over there was, similar to what's happening here. The wave was coming through, and then everyone else is walking around, la-di-da-di, no mask, no nothing, everyone's happy, blah, 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 blah. And they've got the virus, and they're spreading it to everyone else because they've been double vaccinated. But African Americans were like, yeah, I'm not taking the vaccine, Bill Gates, blah, blah, blah. And they were just dropping. And so now what's happening, it came too close to too many families. So a lot of people said that even though, and the Tuskegee factor, the nightmare of that history was a big factor in a lot of people not trusting the government. And I completely agree with that. I mean, I still have my issues, but at the same time, I'm a nerd. So when I see data, I see evidence, I read it, I check it, I make calls, I ask people, I speak to doctors I know and patients, and I make a conclusion based on all those factors, and I have to submerge my emotion. And so that's starting to happen in America. So I can't say that's happening here. And to be honest with you, I haven't looked at the figures of how it's specifically affecting African people. That's one thing. And what I'll do, I'll try and make sure I do that by a fortnight's time, so I can have a better picture. But I do know that we are more disposed to unfortunately, to fatal outcomes. In fact, that's the wrong way around. We're not more predisposed to fatal outcomes because we're actually quite a robust people. But when we find out the people who have died, more of them are likely to be African people and people who have not taken vaccines. So it's not the not having, because this is the trick thing. It's not as simple as just saying if you have the vaccine, you're not going to get it and you're not going to die. And because the truth of the matter is that you can have the vaccine and you can still die. And one of the things that I was worried about has come true now, is that we're learning that the efficacy of the vaccine reduces over time. And there was always a risk that it reduced after 6 months, but it's now looking to be quite clear that it is dropping down. And so even people with natural immunities, because I know some people who refuse to take the vaccine, they caught COVID, they got over it in like a day or two, and they were like, COVID, what nonsense is this? Do you know what I mean? And they were lucky. They had a very strong constitution. You know what I mean? Some of them were smokers. Some of them lived healthy. So I couldn't kind of work out what was it. I was trying to find other ways to avoid taking the vaccine, and I couldn't find out the common cause. So it's just part of your physiology, your lifestyle, the whole lot. But then what I've seen since then is that there are people who have had it before, who have survived it, and now have caught it again. Now they're not dying, so that's a good thing. But obviously, like I said, I haven't done enough research on it. But I don't think they're dying, as far as I know. But what's happening, what was worrying me, is that they're catching it again, which means that our natural immune system, the antibodies that we create naturally, are somehow not enough. The good thing, I say the good thing, is that we're not hearing stories that COVID has mutated again. That is the nightmare that can come with the mixture of unvaccinations and herd immunity, that the virus gets really ragga. It's spreading from people to people. It can't find a way to get all these people to kill them. No one's, you know what I mean? And so what it does, it starts mutating to find a way. But fortunately, that's not happening. So yeah, I hope I know it's a very nerdy technical answer to the question, but yeah, there's also the Grenfell situation. I should really talk about at some stage. Maybe I'll try and do that next week, or bring someone on to do with that, because the case, the inquiry is getting to a really interesting phase. But the reality of the situation, well, I don't want to say anything, because you know how I feel about that. I mean, I don't want to upset the families and kind of like kill any idea of hope. But I am not positive that the inquiry is going to deliver justice. I mean, I've said that before, and you know, some important testimonies coming out, but the noises that ministers and stuff are making is quite disgusting. Whew. Okay, so there we go. Ligali Live. Toyin, Oleander Betty, sister and brother doctor, here in one place. I hope you found the broadcast quite useful. Remember, you can always join us in a couple of weeks' time on what's that, YouTube thingy bob and the Zoom thingy bobby. If we're on Zoom, it will be 933 90905028. Still going to try and do the newsletters, but they may be a gap for a couple of months while I'm adjusting into a new role. I am now a lecturer at University College London. And so I'm going to be doing my community work in a slightly different way. But please trust me. I mean, I have mischief, good mischief, but I mean, don't think I've left the community just because I've gone into an institution. I was doing my PhD and I was still doing community work.
Very much so.
So, but it does mean that I won't be as accessible. You won't see me as visible, just literally because I'm just doing so many different things. I think the IDPAD Centre has an event. I can't remember the date. That's awful. I'm a director and I can't remember the date of our event. There's 2 events taking place at the IDPAD Centre. One is a young people's exhibition. I say young people, but it's an art exhibition. I can't for the life of me remember the date. I think it's next week. Oh God, it's not exhibition, and I was going to ask for your support, but how can I ask for your support if I can't even tell you how to? You can email us info@idpadhackney.org, or you can go down to, or contact Anne Marie at volunteeringmatters.org. They're our partner. they're the ones who are organising it, and we're doing it in partnership. So Anne-Marie at volunteeringmatters.org, Toyin at Ligali.org, or info@idpadhackney.org. If it's on YouTube, so you can rewind it to get those events. And then the wonderful Jermaine Jackman is working with our youth group. He's the director of the Justice section, and they're doing a Young Leaders event, which is taking place in November. It's a Saturday, can't remember the date, I'm really sorry. But that's also looking to be a really good event if you want to support grassroots development amongst young people in London. Actually, the event is a national event, even though it's taking place event in Hackney. I think it's a national event because it should have virtual participation as well as real life participation. So that's it. Thank you for being with us. And as ever,
thank you.
I'll say, may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us.
Ashe.
Ashe.